Whether you love budgeting or hate it, you have to know where your money is coming from and where it's going. Keep listening to hear how Jimmy and I run our monthly finances.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to episode number 83 of the Physician Philosopher Podcast, where we take an uncurated and unapologetic look into physician life, money, and mindset. So today's thought for this episode is this: however you handle your money, you must know what's coming in, what's going out, and you have to review it consistently. All right. So what's up, Lisha?
What's up? Let's see. I just drove home from the hospital and got a nail in my tire. So
Yeah.
hopefully your day is going better than mine.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. Actually, I did that recently and had to learn how to plug a tire, which I'd never done before because it happened and we were going out of town and it was a Sunday. And where I live on Sundays, none of the tire shops are open. So I had to go buy a plugging kit and plug the tire myself. This was like a month ago, and we were actually going to be flying out of Durham. And so I had to plug my tire so that Kristen and I could get to the airport.
No, I don't know how to plug a tire. I also know very little about cars. Every time I'm at a tire shop or car shop, I call my dad because I know nothing. And I feel like I'm constantly oversold things. I saw the tire pressure light in my car go on and I was like, oh, it's just a little low. I never put air in my tires. I just like drive up to Pep Boys and just ask them to help me. And today they were like, there's a nail in your tire. And I was like, okay, so my day's starting off great.
Yeah. It's actually hilarious. So I did the same thing. I filled the air up. I was like, oh, that's weird. The one tire went down, and then it went down again. I was like, I got a hole in this thing somewhere. So I looked around and found it. But this is actually a perfect segue because we're talking about budgeting today, which is, by the way, a topic that I like really, really hate. I hate budgeting. And so like nails and tires and like having to plug them or pay a couple $100s for someone else to plug your tire for you, or whatever, buy a new tire, fits perfectly into this budgeting topic. But before we dive in, I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we're offering a free 2-day live workshop called the Financial Freedom Workshop for physicians. And so if you're catching this live on the day this episode drops, this is actually going to be happening starting tomorrow, Tuesday, June 14th. But don't worry if you miss it, like you catch this episode later in the week, there's going to be a recording. And the second day of the workshop is actually Thursday, June 16th. And so we'll have a directory page where you can catch the replays and all of that stuff. There's actually going to be a free PDF accompanying this, the Financial Freedom Workbook, walk you step by step how to create cash flow in your life and create some of that financial freedom. So on day one, we're going to discuss the secrets to creating that cash flow. And on day two, we're going to talk about 2 of the golden rules that really helped my family pay off $300,000 in debt in 2 years and raise our net worth by about $500,000 in the same amount of time. So if you don't know anything about money, or you simply want to increase your financial literacy in order to get to financial independence faster, make sure to sign up for this 2-day financial freedom workshop. It's live with me for physicians, and actually any medical professional is welcome to join. You can learn more and download the Financial Freedom Workbook that is accompanying that at thephysicianphilosopher.com/workshop. And if that's too many words for you to type, just go to the description of this episode on the podcast player where you're listening. It'll be a link right there. You can click it. All right, Lisha. So again, one of my least favorite topics of all time when it comes to personal finance is budgeting. I love talking about investing. I love talking about even student loans. I love talking about asset protection. And my favorite topic probably is behavioral finance, talking about the psychology of money. But by far and away, my least favorite topic is budgeting. So let's just get this out there right away. Do you have a budget?
I'm embarrassed to say I do not have a budget. I mean, I know what's happening with my money. Let me just put that disclaimer out here. But no, I don't have a strict budget.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because this is a little bit like, and I don't know, maybe I might offend you. I've never asked you this question before, but it's kind of like the Yankees or the Cowboys. Like you either love them or you hate them. And I feel like budgets are the same way. Like you either love budgeting and it's like, it's your jam, it's what you do, it's who you are, or you just can't stand it. And so I actually don't budget either. And I tried. I actually remember when Chris and I were getting married, we are going through premarital counseling, and our pastor who was marrying us, handed us this Excel sheet with, monthly budget items on it. And he wanted us to talk through it because it turns out that money is one of the things that, can make marriage hard. And I remember doing that. And back then, of course, I knew nothing about money because my financial enlightenment happened in like my fellowship. So this was way after that, but I remember getting that Excel sheet. I remember like writing down the numbers, and it'd be hilarious if I could find a copy of that. I wonder if I could, but writing down these numbers for this monthly budget. And all I ever remember is not being able to meet the numbers every month. Like every month I'd screw it up. Every month, I'd forget something. Every month something would come up. And so what it turned into for me was just like this insanely frustrating process where it just caused stress and anxiety for Kristen and me. And so we actually to this day don't budget. But as I went through that kind of financial period where I started learning about personal finance, it kept coming up. It kept coming up, kept coming up. So in your eyes, I know that you and I, we don't budget necessarily, but what do you think the purpose of a budget is? And like, how do you get around like accomplishing that purpose without having a budget?
Yeah, so I think the purpose of a budget is to know what's happening with your money. I think a lot of times the assumption is that folks who don't budget don't know what's happening with their money, and they may get to the end of the month or the end of a 2 week pay period and have less money than they thought they did, or have less money than they need. And so a budget is supposed to help you structure things so that you're not surprised at the end of the month or the end of a pay period, that you know exactly how much money you have to accomplish the things that you desire. So that's what I think the purpose of a budget is. Obviously, you and I have found a way to get to that purpose without a strict budget. And I don't know about you, but I use something called a spending plan. I think it's semantics of what we call it, but we have other ways of getting to that goal.
Yeah, so I call it a cash flow plan, spending plan. I used to call it backwards budgeting. I think it goes by a lot of names, but by and large, I've tried to avoid the word budget just because it has such a
Yes.
negative connotation in my world, and I think for a lot of people too. And it's hilarious because I've talked about this topic so many times. I know there are people listening to this right now. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I love budgeting. I'm a detail oriented person. Like this is my thing. It's what I do. And so for me, like I'm not a detail oriented person. I am a high level, abstract, problem solving kind of person. And if you listen to this podcast, you probably figure that out. I love taking complicated things and making them simple for people. And that's my like superpower. That's, really my superpower. Detailed, not my thing. Like I've got two Kristens in my life. One of them's my sister. She's my business manager at the Physician Philosopher. Hilariously, my wife is also named Kristen. They spell it differently. And she does the detail oriented stuff at home because that's just not my thing. But what I do think is important is that concept, right? The point of a budget is to have cash flow at the end of the month, right? That you can spend money with and enjoy life to some extent. We actually have an episode coming up in the future how you and I are going to talk about how we do spend money and might spend money a little differently than a lot of personal finance gurus talk about. But yeah, so it's all about cash flow, really. The spending plan, a cash flow plan, whatever you want to call it, and that idea is to have an organized or structured way in which you're accomplishing your financial goals first. And I think that happens whether you budget, cash flow plan, spending plan. Like people that know about personal finance, you automate stuff up front, right, to
Yes.
get to those long-term financial goals. And
Yes.
then the details will come out however it ends up coming out, whether that's a budget or cash flow plan. So for me, as always, this comes back to cash flow. Cash flow is king, queen, jester of the courts. Like it's everything. And so when you have the money coming in, whatever that number is at the top, line, and how you get to the bottom of the line, those processes are going to be different. But what you have to accomplish is your long-term, financial plans, your medium-term, your short-term plans, and then spend the rest, right? And that's what a budget helps you do. But yeah, so when it comes to budgeting, I'm kind of curious, like why don't you do it? Why don't you like it? If because I think both of us recognize that if we did do a budget, it may actually, quote unquote, from a math standpoint, be better for us.
Yeah.
So why don't you budget?
The same reason you don't budget. I didn't realize we were this much alike, which is kind of hilarious. But I'm a big picture person too. I hate details, and so one, it took me an exorbitant amount of time to actually like write out a budget. And then the other thing is, I am so type A that if ever I spent $1 more in one category, I would just be so stressed. I would feel like I failed. I would get so anxious. And I was like, look, I don't need this in my life. There's got to be another way to accomplish this goal than by stressing every month or every 2 weeks with, trying to create a budget. And so I try to do it a different way. It seems like very similar to what you do, where I automate things up front and then kind of go from there.
Yeah. And so let me put my coaching hat on for a second and just point out that like, because I think it's really important, right? Because people, we alternate these episodes with money and mindset. And people might sometimes be confused about why that happens. And it's because they're intrinsically linked, right? So when you just said like, if you spend $1 more than you're supposed to in a month, like you had this narrative that you had failed and that failure was a bad thing. It was something to be avoided. And so you changed your circumstance, you changed your system instead of, digging into like, is that really a failure? And it's funny because when I write down the pros and cons of budgeting, that's actually one of the things that I wrote down is that it can be, it can feel a bit restrictive. And it also, to some extent, you can beat yourself up when you spend more money than you budgeted. And back before I knew about coaching and I knew about mindset work, that's exactly what I did. Like 100% all the time. I would go over budget. I'd have to dip into my savings, and then I would tell myself about how, terrible I am financially and how I'm not doing a good job for my family. And, all this other stuff would come out instead of looking at that as an opportunity to learn. And so what I ended up doing instead of flipping the script on failure was I changed my circumstance too. And I started cash flow planning. Now I found mindset work later. So it'd be interesting if I'd stuck with budgeting, or if you'd stuck with budgeting, like if, we could have gotten, to that same spot, but it really does. And for Kristen and me, like, it really, it kind of caused some issues. Like we'd have like our monthly budget meeting that no one wanted to do. Like, neither one of us were into it. It just caused stress. And like, naturally, because you're human beings, like I'd point my finger at what she was spending. She'd point fingers at what I was spending. And so it just caused consternation and sometimes arguments about money, which was the entire point of doing the budget in the first place, was to like know what your money's doing, to know where it's going. And yet it was causing the very problem we were trying to avoid. And so there are some benefits, though, I feel like we should probably mention before we dive into exactly how you and I do this, right? Because if you can get past the detail oriented nature of it, if you can look at your budget each month, and if you make it, you miss it, whatever, you learn from it and view that as an opportunity for growth instead of failure, you really can kind of assign a job for every dollar that you have. Like you can do the $0 budgeting, and you will absolutely get to your financial goals doing it that way. The problem that I've always had, though, with budgeting, with that argument about budgeting, is that I think you and I both recognize, and like I'm alluding to right now with this mindset speak, money is 20% numbers, math, logic, and it's 80% behavior, right? So the same reason that I know you don't love credit cards, I love them. Like I love credit cards, and, I pay them off every month, and like, but like, if you know the psychology behind how you operate and how you spend money and how view budgets in this example, it just doesn't fit my needs. It doesn't fit who I am. And so instead of putting a square peg in a round hole, I decided that I wasn't going to do it. And so talk me through your process a little bit, cash flow planning, and then maybe I'll talk about mine. That maybe we can go that direction. But so you said you kind of meet your financial goals up front. So like, what does that look like in actuality?
Yeah. So I actually divided things up into three buckets: things I have to buy, things I want to buy, and things I should buy. And so the things I have to buy are more fixed expenses. So rent, electricity, insurance, that kind of stuff. Things I want to buy are like discretionary spending things. So like restaurant outings, entertainment, concerts, vacations. And then things I should buy is me trying to build wealth. And so that's money towards debt repayment, and money towards savings, money towards investing. And so I kind of split my money up into those three things. At the start of each month, I have automatic withdrawals because apparently I cannot be trusted to do these things myself. And so I had to literally put systems in place in order to achieve it. And when I'm talking to doctors, that's the things that I, advise them on, is to put systems in place to make it easy to achieve your goals. And because a strict budget was not helpful for me, I tried to do it this way. And so I have an automatic withdrawal for my rent payment, for my disability insurance, for my electricity, for my internet. So those things come out of my check at the same day every month. And so I get that automatically out. I contribute to my retirement savings. And so, that's automatically deducted even before, a large portion before it even hits my bank account. And I think I had alluded to in a prior episode is that I actually have my wealth building account in a totally separate bank account. And so I can't remember how much it is. I think it's probably like 20 or 25% of my net income actually goes to a totally different bank account. And out of that, I, have an automatic withdrawal for like a student loan payment or credit card payment if I have a credit card that month. I have an automatic withdrawal from that account to like a vacation fund, and then automatic withdrawal to a Roth IRA. And then anything else just stays in there and builds up my emergency fund. So I know that was like
Well,
a lot of things.
yeah. So like, just to back up there a little bit, like for those people that are, brand new to personal finance, like everything that you just said might sound like a lot. And it just needs to be kind of a couple things. One, once you set up those automatic things, you do it once and it's always there. So like, it is a little bit of work up front to like, automate So for me, like that looks like automating my, my 403B that comes out, my 457 that comes out, the HSA that comes out, automating, the $500, I send every month to a brokerage account. And so once you do that though, it's set in place. You don't have to worry about it. But with that, on the payment side of things, you start mentioning mortgage or rent or expenses is a very deadly thing, which is monthly payments that are coming out if you're not paying attention to them. So for me, and maybe for you too, since we're not detail oriented people, if I don't look at my credit card statement each month and go back and like kind of comb through it, like I just look at, it takes 5 minutes, but I look at each expense and I pay attention to how much it was, why I spent it, and is it a recurring expense? And if it is, then I make a note of that. I'm like, do I actually use this? Like we were, one month we, YouTube was like having this thing with like Roku and like, so, and it's still a thing, like YouTube TV is not on Roku anymore. And so that's what we were using. And so for like my outside TV that, used Roku, like I couldn't do it. And so I bought Hulu because I didn't know how long this YouTube TV thing would last. Just to like, do the free trial for a week while YouTube TV and Roku were, dealing with their issues. And then I forgot that I did it. And I started paying for Hulu for a couple of months. So I was paying for Hulu and YouTube TV, right, for a couple of months before I was like, oh no, I don't need this anymore. And so I got rid of Hulu and, figured out a way to get around that. But so if you automate things and you have these recurring expenses and you don't have a monthly budget where you're like looking at things looking forward and you review it at the end of the month, you at least have to do that review at the end of the month so that you can make changes going forward. And I do think that that's one of the restrictive things about a budget is that it is very forward looking, like, hey, this is the money we know we have coming in. What are we going to do this month with this money? And then like you assign dollars, but then like the person that you are at day one of that month and the person you are at day 28 might be different people. You might have different interests, different wants, different needs. And so, I always found that restrictive. Whereas for me, like I review looking backwards. That's why I used to call it backwards budgeting. I look at my monthly, payments looking backwards and see, oh, like, yeah, I did spend on that. I did spend on this. Oh, this is a recurring payment. I don't need this anymore. It's not providing value in my life. And I'm not anti-recurring payments. I pay, monthly payments to, a bunch of different things that provide value. But every month you look at it and you're like, oh, is this providing me value anymore? But when you're talking about your numbers, it actually kind of reminded me of Elizabeth Warren's plan. So Elizabeth Warren is kind of known for, the 50-30-20 plan where it's 50%, I think it's 50% needs, 30% wants, and then 20% towards building wealth. And like most financial advice outside of the physician space, it's not great advice for physicians because, saving up 15 or 20% of your money when you start saving when you're 30, 35 isn't necessarily going to get you to the goal you want by the age you want. So you kind of have to think about that. But the idea of having those buckets where you spend a certain amount on, wants, needs, and wealth building, or in your case, the kind of the buckets that you described, I think either way, categorizing that kind of helps you put some guardrails around it. If you're not going to be detail oriented about it, I think that it's important to have those guardrails. And so, but yeah, a lot of the similarities for me too. We spend money. We save money towards our 403B, our 457, our HSA, towards our kids' college savings. Back when I had a monthly student loan payment, that would come out automatically. And then we'd get to this, sum of money at the end of that was left over. And this was the cash flow that we had created that we could use to spend our life. So this is what we used to go on trips, to go out to dinner, to go golfing with my buddies. Like, that remaining money was what I would use to kind of do fun things after we'd already accomplished everything else. And so I think if you're not going to be detail oriented with the budget, that it's so important to automate things up front to make sure you're taking care of it. And so it sounds like you do that too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I will say, it's funny hearing you talk about it because I'm a resident, and so I don't think there would ever be like $20 leaving my account without me knowing for it. It's
That's
like,
funny.
wait, what? Because it's such a, I get paid so little in comparison to you that it's, that sounds like rich people problems.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So, I can't remember if we talked about this before the show, if we were talking about it while after we hit record, but yeah, no. So for me, and I think this is really important to mention. So budgeting, I didn't like it. It caused issues, right? But then like as a resident, every month I was dipping into my savings account. And the reason why was because I wasn't budgeting and I wasn't necessarily good at that. And I hated the detail oriented nature of it. And Kristen had no interest in being involved in that process at all. She's not the money nerd in the family. I am. And so, what it ended up amounting to is that like we would dip into our savings accounts, right? That we were saving up for like, a trip or like whatever. And, we would just every month be trying to pinch pennies together to like try make ends meet when we had bills come up. I didn't have extra income at the time, which we can talk about in a second, because I think that's really important too, like other ways to deal with some of these problems. But for me, a budget during training would have been extremely helpful if I just stuck with it and learned how to do it. And the reason why is because exactly what you're describing. Like now my life is very different. So like my life, we save our money, and then, we have our fixed payments. Well, like we very rarely spend more than we make in a month, unless we have, specific one-time expenses come up or emergency fund expenses that we can dip into. But like we normally don't spend a lot of money, in terms of like other things that are just completely unexpected. And when we do, we normally have enough cash flow to cover that. Whereas when I was a resident, it was not that way at all. And so I really feel like if I toughed it out and figured out budgeting, maybe it would have been a better process when I was in training. But you're right, things really do change. But regardless, if you don't have that automated part at the beginning of your system, whatever that is, even as an attending physician, I cannot tell you the number of people I know who are attending physicians that live basically paycheck to paycheck, despite earning $25,000-$30,000 a month, pre-tax. And so, they bring home their $15,000 or $18,000. And then all of a sudden, it's going to different things. It's going to the bigger house, it's going to the car, it's going to the private school, it's going to all this other stuff. And they spend this lifestyle. And at the end of it, they're like, oh yeah, I guess I'm supposed to save some money for retirement. And so because they do it the wrong way, which is backwards, they spend their money first and save second.
Yeah.
It completely hoses them. And so that problem is the same whether you're a resident or an attending. But if you do it right, it becomes a blessing as an attending, because then you have money left over to spend. And you're like, hey, how do I want to spend that this month?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. And I will say, even though I don't have a strict budget, I did like sit down and comb through what I actually could afford to spend on things. Cause I think that's also a thing. Like so fun fact, I lived with a roommate my first 2 years of residency. And so that allowed me to really pay down a bunch of credit card debt, save a bunch of money, start investing, that kind of thing. And then my third year of residency, we decided that we both wanted our own places, just for more space and privacy and that kind of thing. And so when I realized how much more I was going to spend on rent, having, a one bedroom apartment instead of sharing a 2-2, I realized my expenses at that time were going to go up like $800 a month. And then factoring inflation this year when everybody's rent is increasing, I was just like, oh my God, like how much can I actually, well, how much can I afford in an apartment? And like, so for me, it was actually before I moved into my new apartment, I sat down and said, what is my total take home pay? How much do I want to invest? I'm a Christian, and so I tithe. And so it was like, okay, I also have to factor in that tithing piece where I give 10% of my income to the church. And so it was like, okay, how much is left after that? And then what are some other priorities that I have? And then how much can I actually spend on rent? And then also still like afford to eat and save money for a vacation. And I mean, the numbers get tight. And so I think that you were alluding to earlier in terms of like having other sources of income really does kind of help.
Yeah. And that's part of our automated wealth habits, as well as, tithing. And so that's, it's, and hilariously, even when I didn't know anything about money back in residency, we still did that. Like, so the only piece of my finances that I've always automated is tithing. And so like, I guess if I have to be honest about it, my religious tradition, my background is what taught me how to automate my finances. I've never thought about that until you just said that. But so yeah, okay. So yeah, and that's really interesting. Yeah. So we have some ways to deal with these things, right? So when things come up in budget. So there are lots of tools, right? And so some of the tools, they include budgeting tools, right? Like mint.com or YNAB, you need a budget, or personal capital. Some people just use an Excel spreadsheet. So if you're like the budgeter, like those are absolutely, there are tools out there to help you budget. If you're a detail oriented person, like you can totally go that route. And I think that they're really extremely helpful tools. And actually, if you work on the mindset piece, maybe that, failure narrative that you have might be different than Lisha and, mine when you miss your budget. But then there are other things, right? So savings funds. So that's what I used in residency. Like, okay, I had a net that would catch me, that prevent me to go into credit card debt. And so we had that. Although when I was a fourth year student, I didn't realize, because no one told me. And I guess I was just ignorant. I didn't know anything. But yeah, I didn't realize how much expenses would cost to go and interview, and to like travel and to be in hotels and then to interview. And so it cost me like $5,000 at the end of my fourth year. And like $5,000 as a fourth year med student was like my entire like savings, and so I burnt through that. I actually ended up having to ask to borrow money from my family, because I didn't realize back then that was going to be something coming into my my budget, if you will. And so that really cost me, but the emergency fund, the savings really did help me, with my budget. But then the third one is what you're talking about, right? The non-clinical income. So, or side gigs, or, whatever you want to call this. But basically, if you have a way to turn a faucet on or off a little bit more, a little bit less each month, it can really help you a ton with not needing to be as detailed. Now, does this mean that I spend money, that money comes out of my accounts that I don't necessarily keep as big of an eye on as I would have to if I had a fixed income that didn't change every month, right? 100%. But for me, my business is exactly what you're describing. And so for us, if I really get into a pinch, I do know that there's another, kind of, valve that can open up that can save me. So, I've got my emergency fund. I've got, technically savings for other things like trips and stuff we could tap into if we really had to. But then I've also got this non-clinical income. And usually for me, I just turn that up or turn that down a little bit, depending on what my family needs. And it absolutely has eliminated the need to have a budget, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. And also, you said something. Hold on, pause. You had savings as a medical student? Like, what? I was so broke I was living off student loans. I was like that. Honestly, that time in my life, I probably should have had a budget because I would get this lump sum payment from student loans. And, I'm like in my early 20s or mid 20s or whatever. And I'm just like going out to happy hour with all my friends. And then, like, the month of like April and May, I'm like, oh, y'all, I'm going to be in ramen noodles for the next couple months.
No, so we should probably do an episode on this, just on financial privilege. But I actually, yeah, so I had it really good. And so I had a full ride in undergrad. So full room, board, tuition, everything was paid for. And then I went to medical school, was planning on taking out like two or $300,000 in student loans. And then like maybe a month into my medical school, like, we'd had class elections. I ended up becoming the class president of my medical school class. And for whatever reason, one of my classmates got a better like full ride scholarship for medical school. And so there was a scholarship where I was at Wake called the Medical Alumni Scholarship, and it opened up. And so I was taken off the wait list. I got in really late. It was after I was basically graduating from college. I had no idea what I was doing. I was engaged to Kristen already. They wanted to set a date. I didn't even know if I was going to medical school or not. So I actually remember finding out about getting into medical school. I was working out with my buddy and got a phone call. And I tried, getting in touch with them. They called me back. They said, yeah, we sent you your, acceptance letter like, a couple of weeks ago. And like I was already graduating. I had no idea what I was doing. And so when I got that phone call, I walked outside and I started crying like a baby because I'm an emotional guy. It's what I do. But yeah, so I ended up having a full tuition scholarship in medical school too. And so my expenses for my student loans came solely out of me taking every dollar that I could and living on it during medical school. And so, we took out like, I don't know, 25, 30 grand a year or something like that. And so for the record, this is a financial mistake because my wife had a job. She was a teacher. She didn't earn a ton of money, but we absolutely could have lived on her income as two people living, on a teacher's income. Many people do that. And so I still took out the 25 or $30,000. And so I should have come out of medical school with no debt. And instead I came out with 100. I forbeared on that debt for 5 years. It turned into 150, 160. Kristen did grad school. All of a sudden we had $200,000, $210,000 in student loans. And so, yeah, so I had a lot of privilege, having a scholarship in undergrad, a scholarship in medical school that I just lucked into it, that someone gave up a scholarship. And then I actually was already accepted to that point. Like they'd already given away all of the scholarship money by the time I got accepted to medical school. I was accepted off the wait list. Like I was not, probably a high priority target for them. But then I got there and, things just worked out. And so like we did have a little bit of savings though, but that savings came from Kristen working as a teacher. So because I was married and my wife had a little bit of money that she was making from teaching, and then I stole every dollar I could from the federal government to live on as a medical student. We ended up having 50, ish $1,000 a year as a medical student. And so, we were able to kind of stay afloat. We never, accrued credit card debt because of that, but it was also because I had a very privileged situation.
That's interesting. You know what? As someone who's not married, I have always looked at my co-residents as privileged because, especially my co-residents who were married to other doctors, because I was like, you have two incomes. Or even if they weren't doctors, even if their spouses weren't doctors, I was like, you have two incomes. Can you imagine paying for a one bedroom apartment by yourself, your residency salary is your only income. What if you have kids? Like, it is tough for people in different scenarios. And so I think we probably are going to have to do an episode on that, like how people in different scenarios, like give them some ideas. But yeah, so I didn't have any savings as a medical student. I had debt from my life as a post grad living in DC. Another story for another day. Added on to that debt when I went to interviews as a medical student, and so I was kind of already in the hole by a lot. I had credit card debt, I had student loan debt, I was moving to another state for residency. Like, it was a whole thing. And so when I became a resident, I knew that I wanted to kind of pay off some of that debt. So I lived with a roommate. And then once I decided I was going to live by myself, I knew that I needed to make more money. And that kind of is what segues into this non-clinical income, is because I literally ran the numbers and I was like, my expenses are going to go up by $800 a month. I'm pretty sure my residency salary is not going to go up by $800 a month. So either I'm going to have to like stop tithing, which, that doesn't align with my values, or I'm going to have to stop investing. Again, that doesn't align with my values, or I'm going to have to like live in a dump. Doesn't align with my desires. So, or, I was already like, I don't drive a nice car at all. Like, the paint's missing and it's like a whole, I was already like saving money on the whole car thing. So I was like, how am I going to make more money? And honestly, that is the reason why I started to monetize my blog, careermoneymoves.com. I started to monetize that. I ended up like creating different things that I could sell. I ended up, writing articles that I was paid to publish. And, I ended up getting non-clinical income in a variety of different ways. But that was the impetus. Honestly, I wouldn't have done any of this if I didn't need money. But, being broke really does.
Yeah.
motivate you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as we round out the show, like that might sound, kind of like it's not an option for you. But if you're in residency listening to this right now, like I moonlighted during residency. And honestly, because I didn't know anything about money, the entire reason why I moonlighted during residency was to create extra monthly cash flow. Because honestly, I would spend more money than we had coming in. And instead of like going into credit card debt, I would just pick up an extra shift or three, and then bring that home. And that's how we covered things when we missed on the math. And so all that said, regardless of whether you budget or you do a cash flow plan or a spending plan, you have to automate those things up front. You got to pay yourself first. It's one of the most important things in all of personal finance is creating that top line cash flow and then paying your future self first and meeting all your long-term and medium-term and short-term savings goals, all those financial tasks, and then living on the rest of it. And you can use a budget, a cash flow plan, a spending plan to do that. And there are tools out there to help you do that should you need to. But I just want people to realize that there's no way to get around automating your wealth and having an idea of what you spend, whether you review it at the beginning of the month, the end of the month, or both. So don't forget, if you want to increase your financial literacy in order to get to financial independence faster, make sure to sign up for the 2-day financial freedom workshop for physicians that I'm going to be running on June 14th and 16th. That's a Tuesday and Thursday. If you catch this episode a little late, don't worry. We have a directory page where we'll have the recordings stored. So you can visit that and download your financial freedom workbook. It's a free PDF, step-by-step guide that we're going to be going through during this workshop, and it'll also help you create cash flow in your life. You can get all of that by going to thephysicianphilosopher.com/workshop or clicking the link in the description of this episode. Today's thought was this: however you handle your money, you must know what's coming in, what's going out, and you got to review it consistently. So until next time, my friends, start before you're ready. Start by starting. Start now. We will see you next week. Start before you're ready. Start by starting. Start now.